The Mason family dinner table was a battlefield of unspoken tensions, with Sarah Mason presiding over the evening like a general surveying her troops. At 62, Sarah's elegance was undeniable, but so was the stern set of her mouth as she watched her children with hawk-like attention. "Emily, dear, must you always be on your phone at the table?" Sarah's sigh cut through the clinking of cutlery against china. Emily, 35 and razor-sharp in her tailored suit, looked up from her smartphone with barely concealed annoyance. "Sorry, Mom. Big case tomorrow." Her words were clipped, efficient, much like the tight bun that held back her dark hair. Across the table, Michael smirked at his sister's discomfort. At 30, the youngest of the Mason clan looked every bit the struggling artist. Disheveled hair, paint-stained fingers, and a worn t-shirt that had seen better days. "Yeah, Emily, some of us are actually present for family dinner," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Present? Where's Lizzie then?" The empty chair beside Michael seemed to mock them both. Before Michael could retort, Robert Mason intervened. At 64, his kind eyes and graying hair gave him the air of a gentle patriarch, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed the weight of unspoken burdens. Now, let's not bicker. This is supposed to be a nice family dinner." Grace, Robert's mother, patted his hand with a frail but affectionate touch. At 80, her mind often wandered, but there was still a spark of mischief in her rheumy eyes. "That's right, Bobby. Just like the old days. Remember when Jack used to come for Sunday roast?" The room plunged into silence. Sarah's fork clattered onto her plate, the sound sharp and accusing. Robert's face drained of color, his eyes darting nervously to his wife. Sarah's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Mother Grace, we've talked about this. There's no Jack." Confusion clouded Grace's face. "But I remember—" "Who's Jack?" Emily interjected, her lawyer's instinct for detail kicking in. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "No one. He's no one." She moved behind Robert, placing her hands on his shoulders in a gesture that seemed more possessive than affectionate. "Now, your father and I have an announcement." Robert reached up to pat Sarah's hand, but his smile seemed forced, a poor mask for the unease in his eyes. Sarah continued, her voice bright with forced cheer. "As you know, our 40th wedding anniversary is coming up next month. We've decided to have a big celebration." Michael's response was less than enthusiastic. "Wow, 40 years. That's something." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emily, ever the efficient one, switched seamlessly into planning mode. "A party? That's great. I can help organize. I'll call the country club tomorrow." Sarah beamed at her daughter, a rare moment of approval. "Wonderful. I knew I could count on you, Emily." "Michael, I trust you and Lizzie will help too." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes fixed on his half-empty plate. "Yeah, about that. Lizzie and I, we're kind of—" Before he could finish, Grace's dreamy voice floated across the table. "A party? Oh, how lovely. We must invite Jack. He always livened things up." The room froze. Robert stood up suddenly, his chair protesting loudly against the floor. "I think it's time we cleared the table," he said, his voice shaking. "Emily, Michael, help your mother. I'll take Grace to her room." As Robert gently guided Grace out of the room, Sarah began stacking plates with trembling hands. Emily and Michael exchanged a look, sensing the undercurrent of secrets threatening to break the surface of their carefully constructed family facade. Later that night, Emily sat cross-legged on her old bed, surrounded by boxes of party supplies she dug out of the attic. As she opened a dusty photo album, a stack of yellowed letters fell into her lap. Her eyes widened as she began to read, the truth of her family's past unfolding before her in faded ink and whispered confessions. "Oh my God," she whispered into the silent room, the weight of discovery heavy on her shoulders. The Mason family's carefully guarded secrets were about to change everything. And Emily found herself at the center of a storm 40 years in the making. The letters, written in an unfamiliar hand, spoke of a passionate affair between Sarah and a man named Jack. The timeline coincided with the early years of Sarah and Robert's marriage, and more disturbingly, with Emily's own birth. Over the next few weeks, as preparations for the anniversary party intensified, so did the underlying tensions in the Mason household. Sarah micromanaged every detail, her perfectionism a thin veil for her growing anxiety. Robert retreated into himself, spending long hours in his study, ostensibly working, but more often staring at old photographs with a wistful expression. One evening, as Emily pored over the letters for the 100th time, a soft knock at her door startled her. It was Michael, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Hey, Em," he said, perching on the edge of her bed. "What's going on with you lately? You've been different." Emily hesitated, torn between her instinct for truth and her fear of shattering their family. Finally, she handed Michael one of the letters. "Read this," she said softly. As Michael's eyes scanned the page, his face went through a gamut of emotions: confusion, shock, anger, and finally, a sad understanding. "Oh, Em," he breathed. "Does this mean—" Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I think so. I think Dad might not be my biological father." The siblings sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of this revelation settling over them. Then, unexpectedly, Michael laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Well, I guess we're both family disappointments now, huh?" "What do you mean?" Emily asked, frowning. Michael sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Lizzie and I, we're separating, probably for good this time." As the two shared their secrets, a new bond formed between them, forged in the fire of their family's unraveling truths. As the day of the anniversary party drew nearer, tensions in the Mason household reached a fever pitch. Sarah's perfectionism became almost manic, while Robert retreated further into himself, spending long hours in his study. One afternoon, Emily decided to confront her father. She found him sitting at his desk, staring at an old photograph. It showed a much younger Sarah laughing as she looked at someone out of frame. The look of love on her face was unmistakable, and it wasn't directed at Robert. "Dad," Emily said softly, "we need to talk." Robert looked up, his eyes tired and sad. "You know, don't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Why, Dad? Why did you stay?" Robert was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "Because I loved her," he said finally, "and because I loved you, from the moment I first held you in my arms. Biology didn't matter. You were my daughter." As they talked, years of unspoken truths came pouring out. Robert spoke of his pain, his choice to forgive, his deep love for both Sarah and Emily. And Emily, for the first time, saw her father not as an authority figure, but as a man, flawed, loving, and deeply human. Meanwhile, Michael found an unlikely confidant in Grace. During her moments of lucidity, she offered him a perspective tempered by years of experience. "Your grandfather and I," she told him one day, "we weren't always happy, but we chose each other every day. Sometimes, love is a choice, Michael. And sometimes, the bravest choice is to let go." Her words resonated deeply with Michael, giving him the courage to finally be honest with himself about his failing marriage. The night of the anniversary party arrived, the country club ballroom a glittering testament to Sarah's meticulous planning. But beneath the surface, the Mason family was a powder keg, waiting to explode. The fuse was lit when Grace, in a moment of startling clarity, called out to a man who had just entered the room. "Jack, you made it!" The man, distinguished, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, froze in the doorway, his gaze locking with Sarah's across the room. In that moment, 40 years of history crackled between them. Sarah's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the polished floor. "Jack," she whispered, her face a mix of longing and terror. Emily, who had been watching her parents closely, saw the moment Robert's composure cracked. In 3 long strides, he crossed the room and landed a solid punch on Jack's jaw. Chaos erupted. Guests gasped and murmured. Michael rushed to restrain his father, and Emily, letter in hand, finally found her voice. "Stop!" she shouted. "Everyone, stop! I think it's time we all heard the truth." Over the next hour, as shocked guests quietly excused themselves, 40 years of secrets unraveled. Sarah confessed to a long-ago affair with Jack, a love she had given up for the sake of her family. Robert admitted to knowing about the affair but choosing to forgive, his love for Sarah overcoming his pride. And Emily, her world tilted on its axis, revealed the letters she had found in the attic. "I know the truth," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I know Jack is my biological father." A collective gasp rippled through the remaining guests, who now formed a smaller, tighter circle around the Mason family. Sarah looked at Emily, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Emily, Why didn't you tell me?" Emily demanded, cutting her off. Her voice cracked with the weight of all the years she'd lived believing one thing, only to have it shattered in an instant. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she reached out toward her daughter. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to destroy the family. Robert has been your father in every way that matters. I thought it was best to leave the past behind." Robert, still nursing the pain of both his hand and heart, stepped forward. "I never wanted you to feel like you weren't my daughter, Emily. I've loved you as my own from the moment you were born. But it wasn't my secret to tell." The room fell into a heavy silence, each family member lost in their thoughts. Grace, her earlier clarity now faded, looked around the room, confused by the tension she could no longer grasp. Why is everyone so upset? This is supposed to be a happy occasion. It was Michael who broke the silence, his voice soft but steady. "Maybe it still can be. Look, this family has been through a lot tonight, more than most families could handle in a lifetime. But maybe this is our chance to start over, to be honest with each other for once." His words hung in the air, a fragile hope. Emily looked at her brother, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and then turned back to her parents. "I don't know how we move forward from here," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I do know that I need time to process all of this." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Take all the time you need, Emily. We're here for you no matter what." Jack, who had been silently standing in the background, stepped forward. His presence was a reminder of the past, but also a challenge to the future. "I never wanted to disrupt your life, Emily, but if there's ever a time you want to talk, or know more about me, I'll be here." Emily looked at the man she now knew as her biological father, feeling a complex mix of emotions: anger, curiosity, sadness, and something else she couldn't yet define. "I don't know what I want right now," she said honestly, "but thank you for saying that." Robert, whose face was lined with both physical and emotional pain, looked at Sarah, then at Emily. "We've all been living with lies, hiding things we should have faced years ago. But this family has a chance to heal if we're willing to work through this, together." Sarah took Robert's hand, her grip firm despite her tears. "I love you, Robert. I've always loved you, even when I was confused about what I wanted." "I know," Robert replied, his voice hoarse but sincere. "I've always known. And I love you too, Sarah. I've never stopped." As the night wore on, the Mason family found themselves at a crossroads. The party had ended in ways no one could have predicted, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter. Emily, Michael, Sarah, and Robert all were left to grapple with the truths that had come to light, but also with the realization that love, in all its complicated forms, was still at the heart of their family. And so, As the last of the guests departed and the lights in the ballroom dimmed, the Mason family was left standing together, no longer hiding behind their secrets, but facing them head-on. They didn't have all the answers, and they knew the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in years, they were ready to walk it together.